Today we will explore the Old Testament from beginning to end in 12 minutes. The Bible is one of the most powerful and well-known books in the world, considered by many as a spiritual and moral work of art. The book combines the pearls of culture that are appreciated in different cultures around the world. He is the starting point of Jewish history and culture and is the basis of all monotheistic nations today. Bible stories challenge the reader to reveal meaning within and between the words. The figures and events in the Bible constitute a parable and a message that affects even today, and that's why they are so important. Let's begin. In the beginning, before anything existed, before there was any place, before everything, was God. Everywhere and eternal. God possessed everything and did not need to create the world. However, God chose to create, and at first, it appeared formless and empty, shrouded in darkness. God separated light from darkness, which then led to the creation of different elements. Then the water was separated between above and below. Dry land emerged, bringing life to the plants. While the air was cleared and allowed the sun, moon, and stars to be visible, sea, flying, and walking animals were created. But one of God's masterpieces came with the creation of Adam, the first man. God gave him an idyllic garden and later a female companion named Eve. The difference between Adam and Eve allowed for a meaningful relationship and revival of God's world. God provided plenty of trees and designated two crucial ones. Eating from one ensured eternal life, while eating from the other led to death. Adam and Eve, tempted by a serpent, who was the spirit of Satan, gave up, broke God's command, and lost access to the tree of life. They were punished for that by being expelled from Eden's garden. Humanity, having chosen disobedience, faced the consequences of mortality. Despite their sins, God did not destroy humanity. Rather, a promise was made, that the person who will be chosen by God will end the devil's reign of terror. Despite the sins of Adam and Eve, God's mercy prevailed. But their sin did not end with them and passed on to their descendants, when Cain turned to jealousy and murdered his brother, because of God's love. As humanity expanded, sin and evil multiplied in Cain's and Seth's descendants. From this prevailing darkness, Noah emerged, a righteous man chosen to save the world. God ordered him to build an ark and saved him and his family from a catastrophic flood that destroyed humanity. At the end of the flood, God gave them the rainbow, which became a symbol of God's covenant, which promised not to destroy the world again. Despite the flood, humanity has not learned and remains damaged. The descendants of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, from whom the new world was created, were challenged by evil and sin. Their descendants began to build the Tower of Babel, in an attempt to replace God with the evil Nimrod and rule the world. This is what drove God to confuse languages and divide people into nations. In search of a nation devoted to the one true God, God chose Abraham. Abraham, even though his wife was older, believed in God's promise of many descendants. Abraham became the father of Isaac, Ishmael, and other sons with his wife Sarah and his concubines Hagar and Keturah. Isaac, later named Israel, in memory of the struggle against the angel of God, gave birth to 12 children who became the sons of Israel and from whom the 12 tribes of Israel were created. Once the brothers had sinned and sold Joseph, God turned Joseph's adversity into victory. After the drought in Canaan, the Israelites went down to Egypt, where they were welcomed. They began to face slavery and hard labor, which led to the great leader's story. Moses. who was born a Hebrew and lived as a prince in Pharaoh's kingdom. In response to the oppression he witnessed, he killed an Egyptian soldier who provoked a Hebrew slave. Moses is forced to flee Egypt, flees to the desert where he joins to Midian family, married to Zipporah, and becomes a shepherd, a hint to the leaders to come. By the way, all the great leaders in the Bible were like that. But one day, God appears to Moses in a burning bush and says that it is time for the Israelites to receive the promised land. After refusing to accept the mission, by explaining that he cannot be a leader because he is not such a figure, Moses is convinced by God. God tells Moses to warn the Egyptian leader to release his people. Moses returns to Egypt and warns Pharaoh to free his people. "Let my people go," says Moses. But Pharaoh refused. Then God gave Moses the ability to cause plagues in Egypt. It begins when the river turns to blood. And Pharaoh refused. Frogs everywhere. And Pharaoh refused. Lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. But Pharaoh refused. And then comes the final plague, the plague of firstborns, and what does Pharaoh answer? No. But when his firstborn son died, Pharaoh understood God's power and agreed to let them leave. As the Israelites leave for the promised land, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends the army after them. They are found by the Red Sea. Then miraculously, the waters of the Red Sea split in two, the Israelites fled and the Egyptians drowned. During their journey, they stop at Mount Sinai so that God will give them the 10 Commandments, the laws that will serve them in the future. Moses ascended the mountain and received the tablets of the covenant, which included the 10 Commandments. But with the waiting the Israelites sin and worship a golden calf. God is angry, and Moses breaks the tablets. But as a result of Moses' efforts, they are saved from the decree and are not destroyed. As they approach the promised land, 12 spies are sent to see and inspect the land of Canaan. When the spies return and report about the land, they are afraid to fight, because they didn't have faith in God's covenant. They were punished and wandered in the Sinai desert for 40 years. Even though Moses did nothing wrong, he too will not be able to enter the promised land. And only the next generation will have the right to convene. Led by Joshua, the Israelites entered, conquered Jericho, and claimed the land. At that time, judges ruled over the people, protecting them from enemy nations. But the people want a king. Samuel the prophet warns against this, but they insist. Eventually, a man whose strong faith in God rose, this was Saul, becomes king, but not for a long time. Because Saul sins, Samuel is sent again to choose a new king, and in the story emerges the red-haired shepherd, David. But Saul oppresses and is jealous of David. When David arrives in one of the wars against the Philistines, he defeats Goliath, which makes him a hero. Saul wants to kill David, but David spares him. Then Saul dies in one of the battles along with his sons, and David becomes king. Despite David's initial victories, he sins, but God promises him an eternal kingdom through his descendants. With so many victories, so many wars, and the deaths of important figures in his own life, David receives a punishment that he will not build God's temple, but his son Solomon. Solomon, David's son, went on an extraordinary journey, seeking wisdom from God and recording his wise reflections. His wise remarks were admired by kings and queens around the world, turning his kingdom into a light that glorifies God. But Solomon's path turned sour when he succumbed to the temptation of many wives and concubines, some of whom were not of his people, which led him to worship foreign gods. As a result, the kingdom faced downfall, eventually splitting into Israel and Judah, both plagued by idolatrous rulers. During this period of chaos, great prophets arose, who urged the people to return to God. Even when the temple was desecrated for idolatry, the prophets advocated restoration and not abandonment. Despite the reforms led by some righteous kings, Israel fell to Assyria, and Judah surrendered to Babylon. The temple was destroyed, and the Israelites exiled. Eventually, under Persian rule, King Cyrus allowed the Israelites to return, funded the restoration of the temple, and fostered hopes for an eternal kingdom. And so, the expectation of the promised eternal kingdom continued. Prophets prophesied about a future king. Daniel said that this kingdom would outlast all other kingdoms. Micah said that this king would be born in Bethlehem. Isaiah said this king will suffer for the sins of his people. And Zechariah said God will send God to live with us. The meaning is that men will be the messenger of God, the Son of God. We hope you learned something new today. If you did, give this video a like and share it with your friends. You can share with us what you know by leaving a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative and entertaining content. Thank you so much and see you next time.